Today we're looking at Robert Oster's Direct Sun. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Robert Oster's Direct Sun is a red ink. And to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do my writing samples. I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Delight Alpha with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is there's a little bit of pink hold on it, pushes away almost immediately though, leaving some pink trails up into the red. I don't think that there's a whole lot of complexity to this ink, which makes it pretty nice. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I put it into water. And it looks exactly the same. The fact that the second one, after it's allowed to dry, looks exactly the same makes me say I expect no kind of resistance at all from this ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let that smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, you can't read it. No, it's gone. Don't highlight this ink. That is a bad idea. It doesn't like it. It completely reactivates and goes all over the place, creates a mess. Only highlight if you're trying to destroy the words that are underneath it. And with that, you would expect it. Looking at water, a drop of water for 30 seconds completely removes it from the page. Now, we don't have just a white dot remaining, but, you know, give it just a little bit longer and that's all that you'll have remaining. Pen flush does the same thing that water does. We do see one little spot where even more comes up, but I don't think you're going to need pen flush to take this out of your pen. And bleach, as you would expect, completely obliterates it. It's gone, but don't use bleach to get this ink out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Direct Sun has a viscosity of 2.92, puts it just outside the normal range. What it actually means, being on that side, because we haven't had a lot of inks come up over there, it means less ink goes onto the page. It's actually a drier ink, but that doesn't mean that you don't get a nice vivid red. It just means that it doesn't flow as fast. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper with the extra fine and medium nib. Robert Oster's Direct Sun has an average dry time of 8 seconds. Wow, that's super fast, super fast. It's amazingly fast. Now, with the fact that this is a very high viscosity ink, so not as much goes down, you could, in that way, sort of expect that it can dry faster. There's not as much ink on the paper. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade whatsoever. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does show some shading. In the writing. Not tons. You really got to look at it, and you see it in the lazy, you see it in the dog, you see it in the fox. It shows much more in the scrubby than it does in the writing sample. But it is there. 5 seconds to dry. Medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. And the same with the shading. It is there. It's very subtle. Quick shows a bunch of the shading. Brown shows a bunch of the shading. Fox, each of the words shows some of this shading. 11 seconds to dry. The extra fine and the medium scrubby show us we should get some color variation. Pardon me, some color variation, and we do. The smear test says you could likely recover this if you smeared it while you were using it. So, Tomoe River. Other than in a scrubby where I put it on stupid thick, we don't see any kind of bleeding. We don't see, and we see show through. We have ghosting. This has been pretty good for the ghosting on this paper. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Tomoe River kills a bunch of that. It draws out the dry time. It's nice for inks that sheen. It really brings out that sheen. Other than that, I feel like this paper destroys so many qualities of an ink. 8 seconds to dry. The medium, it's a noticeably darker tone than we got with the extra fine. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It took 12 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us we're not getting a ton of color variation, and, well, we didn't. The smear test, actually, I think you could recover this on a smear. I think you'd stand a good chance, at least. So I look at Rhodia, and the Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Sort of avoided this ink because I thought it was going to be a yellow and then it was a red, and it's just kind of a red. The extra fine gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Some shading through the writing, not a ton of shading. It's really, again, you have to really look at it to spot that shading. The C to the K on quick. The upstroke to where it goes over twice on the is noticeably darker. The X in Fox is noticeably darker. There's spots of noticeably darker, and that's about it. We have 3 seconds to dry. This as a tone does look lighter than it came with the 1.1, and it looks like it gets darker in tone again for the medium. The medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does show some of the same shading. Not very much of it, but some of that same shading. That's just a little bit. Where we see it a little bit in the K, we see it a little bit on the P of the jumps, the X of Fox, the E that closed in on itself for seconds. 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us we're going to get a little bit of color variation. We did. And the smear test says you could likely recover this. So I went to look at this ink on some different tone paper, the yellow Rhodia. It had no bleeding and no ghosting. And the tones, if we look across at the 1.1 or straight across at the extra fine or at the medium, they're basically unchanged for being on yellow paper. So, I mean, it's a strong dye in this ink. It really holds its color. So the 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine is a noticeably darker tone still, noticeably lighter tone still. With no feather, spread, halo, sheen. Yes, it does have shading. It exhibits the same kind of shading we saw in the white Rhodia, where it gets darker in certain spots like the K of quick, part of the Q of quick. The, as an entire word, looks darker than over. So we do get it in the writing. 3 seconds to dry. The medium, a noticeably darker tone again, with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and I'm not seeing the shading in this writing sample. 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby on the extra fine shows us the color variation we got up here, which wasn't a ton, but was some. The medium shows us we don't get any color variation, and the smear test says you could probably recover it. So I tested Lloydstrom. The Lloydstrom paper gave us no bleeding, no ghosting, really. Nice. Very dark tone for the 1.1. It had... It's hard to say if that is spread. I think it is spread. So we have spread on the 1.1. We don't have any feathering. We have no halo, no shade, no sheen. The extra fine has no feathering, no spread, no halo, sheen, or shade. It went away on this paper. 4 seconds to dry. So not too bad. If you're carrying this as a notebook, this isn't too bad in how it does. Its performance is more than adequate. It's a good performing ink. I'll put it that way. The medium, a noticeably darker tone with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade to be seen. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby on this paper showed us we're not going to get color variation, and we didn't. The smear test, strangely, I don't think you could recover it on here, but you can on the Rhodia. Is a treated, it's a coated paper. Anyway, so I decided to look at Moleskin. If we're going to look at Lacetrim, why not look at Moleskin at this point? So with Moleskin, yes, it did bleed through and spot. There's a ton of spotting through. The scrubby starts to come through. Not the end of the world here. I think this is a very good ink for this paper. If you're using an extra fine or a very dry nib and you love Moleskin, I think you can get away with this ink. So the top's written with a medium. The medium has, wow, look at that. I mean, it has no feather, no spread. Yeah, it has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. But it has no feather and no spread. And look at that extra fine. That extra fine has no feather and no spread. That's an amazing thing. So despite this bleeding through, we're getting no feather and no spread here. That's amazing stuff on Moleskin. No halo, no sheen, no shade. 3 seconds to dry. Very manageable for a pocket-sized notebook to deal with. The scrubby shows us we're not going to get any of the color variation. And the smear, you could recover this, which is a bonus when you're talking about a carried around notebook and, whatever pen happens to be in your pocket. But this ink does very well. And that's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Direct Sun, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I've chosen Diamine Registrar's Blue-Black because it is a nice dark blue-black to go with this very bright red. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Direct Sun? When I was ordering it, the name made me think it was going to be a yellow ink, and I was a little kind of worried. I didn't see the ink when I was ordering it. Nope, it's red. Good news, it's a nice vivid red. Not my red. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of red inks. To me, I find most every red ink pretty boring. Not boring in a good way, boring and dull to me. That aside, the ink works very well and it is a pleasant one to write with, the feeling in the pen. I'm not a huge fan of red inks, but this is a good one. Thanks for watching.